We're now going to welcome Rebecca from Parents of Vision Impaired New Zealand. Rebecca Graham, good morning and nice to see you again.
Oh, good morning. It's nice to be here. Now, is it showing on your screens? Because I seem to be a bit blank on mine.
Yes, we can see your screen share.
Ta-da! And look, there I am as well.
Perfect. Morena.
Morena. So I'm here on behalf of Parents of Vision Impaired, where I am the National Director, and we're a charity that engages in a lot of peer support and advocacy on behalf of our families, and our families are parents of a blind, deaf-blind, low vision or vision impaired child or young person, or sometimes a bit older. Our families come from across the country in all walks of life, and as we say, disability doesn't discriminate. So some very hard-working mums and dads. You would have seen in a written submission on the Regulatory Standards Bill that we are really concerned about this bill because it doesn't consider the international conventions that New Zealand is a signatory to, with particular attention being given to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We're also concerned because the Regulatory Standards Bill doesn't really take a human rights approach, and that it doesn't really allow for what our families in our community would need and what supports them. Our families know that we are very much stronger together. We are very reliant on each other, both on our own families, but also in the communities and the connections that we have. And it's those communities and connections that our families draw support from and encouragement from and help us to keep going when sometimes it gets really hard. We are concerned that the Regulatory Standards Bill would prevent or slow down good lawmaking. And by good lawmaking, I mean legislation that would have positive outcomes for our families. It also creates another layer of red tape. It adds additional bureaucracy and makes it harder for our elected representatives to create and pass legislation that results in the type of positive material difference to our parents' lives. And that sounds very abstract. So what I've done is I've got a couple of examples of previous legislation to help try and make it a lot more concrete. So, for example, we have the Copyright, New Technologies and Other Matters Amendment Act from 2008, particularly thinking about Part 6, which is provisions for the print disabled. So this amendment back in 2008 was introduced because we needed particular copyright exceptions, which would allow the creation and distribution of copies of material, written material in accessible formats. And by accessible formats, I'm talking about things like Braille, about large print, about audio. And what this bill did is it meant that organisations like Blind Low Vision New Zealand, previously known as the Blind Foundation, and BLENZ, the Blind Low Vision Education Network New Zealand, could then create, Braille and large print copies of books without requiring the explicit permission from the copyright holder. And so this bill, understandably, removed some very long-standing legal barriers that kept blind and low vision and deafblind people from being able to access books, being able to access learning materials, and anything that had a copyright on it. It also meant that New Zealand was now aligned with the international disability rights norms. And from this bill, New Zealand then went on to reinforce the Marrakesh Treaty, which again is about international disability rights. If the Regulatory Standards Bill had been in play at the time, it would have made it incredibly difficult for this legislation to pass. And if the Regulatory Standards Bill is passed, because of what it includes about going back over past legislation, it places this legislation at risk. And reasons behind that is that copyright is considered a form of intellectual property, and the Regulatory Standards Bill has property rights as more important than things like human rights and access to books and materials for blind persons. Also, the Regulatory Standards Bill talks about having quantifiable cost benefit. But the benefits of accessibility and inclusion are a lot more difficult to measure in dollars. Not impossible, but it's quite hard. And a lot of the economic measures don't really account for long-term benefits of accessibility. So in summary, for this bill, the Regulatory Standards Bill would end up prioritising the rights of copyright holders rather than the rights of our blind population, our blind citizens, our children, to be able to access information. Another example that is directly relevant to our families is very long-winded New Zealand Public Health and Disability Support Services Payment for Care of Children Amendment Act in 2020. And that act primarily repealed Part 4A of the New Zealand Public Health and Disability Act 2000. This was a really important piece of legislation for our families because it removed the restrictions that had been in place, which meant that family members could not be paid for providing disability support services to their children or to a family member. And this repeal really removed some of the discriminatory elements that had been in play from the previous legislation. Also, that bill meant that disabled people could choose who provided their care, and if they wanted a family member to provide care, they could pay that family member at the same rates as what they would pay a non-family caregiver, which is a really important piece of legislation, particularly for mums, who are often the ones who give up paid employment to provide care for a child. It also worked to alleviate some of the poverty that was occurring in families, and it acknowledged caregiving as a legitimate skilled piece of work over and above or different to parenting. The challenges this piece of bill would face under the Regulatory Standards Bill include challenges around property rights and economic neutrality, because you could make the argument that the government is unfairly advantaging one group over another. Again, the cost benefit analysis is tricky, because if you're only including the quantifiable economic benefits, you're ignoring what it leaves out. This bill leaves out the human rights, the benefits from human rights, lived experience and long-term social good. And there's a potential argument around government not interfering in private family matters, which would make it harder to justify the public funding of this type of arrangement. So there was a potential there that under the Regulatory Standards Bill, this change in legislation, which has been really valuable for families, could be dismissed as too expensive, too complex, or even ideologically incompatible with the bill, with the lens that the bill demands. I'm going to stop there because it means we have time for questions.
That's right. Well done. We've got a question from Dr. Deborah Russell.
Hey, Rebecca, good to see you. And thank you for your continued work in this area. Look, there's a couple of things I found interesting. One is you really have brought out that the cost-benefit analysis may be too short-term. What do you think might be an appropriate sort of length of time over which to try to measure costs and benefits? Sorry, I know that's almost an impossible question to answer, but have you got a sense there?
Yes, only because I've read a report that Whaikaha recently released around economic costs and benefits, in which they admitted it was very hard to measure these things. But one of the things they looked at was education in that report and trying to measure the economic impact. And what they came up with was that because we failed to ensure that our children, disabled children, have an inclusive education, this then creates a whole raft of long-term disadvantage over their life course. And I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but I know the report came from Whaikaha, so they can probably provide some more detail there.
Okay, and just another point in that regard, it's really well brought out in your written submission around intersectionality and the impact on, particularly on Māori and Pacifica children, of some of the issues you've raised. Can you speak to that a little bit for the benefit of the committee?
Sure. It is really challenging, particularly for Māori and Pacifica whānau who face additional barriers over and on top of other families. And that pertains particularly in health to the way in which racism ends up embedded in all sorts of strange ways. And it's hard, again, to quantify that. And one of the reasons it's hard is that a lot of Pākehā don't experience those barriers. And so it's hard for us to talk to them. And the reason I'm so aware of them is that over our lifetime, seeing the way the atmosphere shifts, the way people change their attitude, the way people change their interactions to my family, who are Māori, when I'm in the room and when I'm not in the room. And there are times when there has been a really noticeable shift and change. And legislating to ensure that equity and health occurs and having decision-making powers for Māori organisations is a really powerful way of shifting that at a structural and systemic level. And what the Regulatory Standards Bill is, it undermines that and underpicks that, and it doesn't recognise that actually some of these inequities exist and that we need to be able to provide legislation and support to help shift at a systems level, at a social level, so that all of our families get equitable access to the healthcare and supports that they need.
Thank you, Rebecca. We have met time.
Okay, probably what I'm going to do in the future is if you guys want to say something while the footage is running, just put your hand up and I'll pause it, because otherwise we just end up with our faces just staring at a submission for like 10 minutes. And it's just like everyone falls asleep and everyone gets, and it's not to say that the person submitting is boring, it's just because a lot of us have already watched these submissions before. So it's like, oh, we're watching them again. So I see you guys in the chat. I know you've also been watching these submissions live, because I've also been watching them live. I've seen you. All right, thoughts.
Yeah, like when I go to equity, usually my default example is people with special needs who need more special access, who, for example, if we're all equal under the law and we're applying that fairly at everyone, do we not require ramps at that point? So it's just stairs, for example, people with wheelchairs or other walking-based disabilities. It's a silly premise. Just make everyone equal, carte blanche under the law with no consideration for additional factors. I don't think I had too much else to add to that submission. It was a pretty...
And you are correct as always, because the idea is like, oh, we're all equal, therefore we've all got equal needs, and it's like, nah.
Yes.
The premise doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like climb that tree first.
Yeah.
It's it's not cool, but it was really nice to hear her talk about, the inequities, because a lot of it, David Seymour talks about, it's all about race-based, but there's all sorts of other issues, like she was saying about, disabilities, that how, they're going to be the ones having to climb the tree, and they're the fish, like it's just
Yeah,
not cool.
bringing up the race-based argument, like saying, "Oh, it's all because we don't do race-based things." It's like it's so dumb, and it's such a lazy way of thinking. And I have no patience for that level of laziness when it comes to thinking. Like David Seymour's like, "Come on, no, it's not because they're brown they've got worse health outcomes. It's because of A, they've got no money. B, they're not living in proximity to a nice healthcare centre that they can afford. C, poor diets. D, overworked." It's like it's a whole shit show of things. But David Seymour.
I'm so.
I don't know why people call him smart. I find him to be quite a lazy thinker.
He's simplistic, but that's used to his advantage because it's always the way he delivers information is always favorable in those short. He's basically catered his message delivery to be immune to the whole cutting down giant speeches into like 10-second sound bites for the evening news, because that's what I noticed leading up to the election. He's very simple. He's always redirecting back to the same point. And that would be every criticism of Labour leading up to the election was like, okay, and this is an issue, and this is an issue because it has too much bureaucracy, and that's costing the taxpayer too much, and that's causing bad economy, and that's why we got to lower taxes and lower bureaucracy and the red tape. And it was pretty much every issue he just managed to tangent it back to that core issue of his. And he's an effective communicator in that matter. Very, very simple, very basic, but of course, anyone who may have seen just the little bit that they've released already of the Cambridge, was it Cambridge? Oxford, sorry, debate. Yeah. He's not good when he's speaking for extended periods of time. Yeah. In fact, he almost digs his own grave.
That's when his arguments turn to melted plastic, I've noticed. A bit like a school lunches.
Yes.
But
no, that was great. I really enjoyed listening to her. She was, it was nice to see that there are other groups out there that are going to be really disadvantaged, and where he's preaching one law for all. Well, that just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It's in schools and that there's so much inequity, especially for our disabled students. There are lots of schools that still don't cater for them. So I really enjoyed listening to her submission and the laws that she quoted. Well done. That was really well presented.
Yeah, even some stuff I wasn't quite aware of was highlighted there. Like apparently, I guess I've had issues in the past of with copyright, trying to make braille from books, for example, by the sounds of it, which is just fucked on the surface of it. It's like we're trying to look. You haven't made a braille book for the blind so they can read it, like. I'm sure probably their answer was like, well, you can pay for it on fucking Audible or some shit. I don't know.
Yeah, that is crazy, Gosh, I really feel for them.
Before we move on, I just want to tackle this comment. Like, Simon is right. We are not very good at simplifying things on the left. We tend to go into very long, drawn-out academic sentences, and that's because we actually care about providing an answer to the problem. Whereas the ACT Party just wants to just bash you over the head with a simple solution that they promise is going to fix everything, but in actuality is going to make everything a hell of a lot worse. And in relation to that, speaking about this bill, it reminds me a lot of the TPP. You remember the TPP back in the day? It was going to give corporations the ability to directly sue the government.
Yes.
Yeah. If their policies impacted trade. That's what this reminds me of. There are elements of the TPP in this bill, and it's kind of scary.
Yes, yeah. No, it's really interesting because David Seymour's on a mission, and he's just gonna, just get out of my way. You're either on my waka or get off it, and I'm gonna go and get this bill through no matter what. It's really interesting to see just how willing he is to push this thing. It's been around for 20 years plus, and he's still going at it. I was thinking, wow, this is amazing. so many opposition to it, and I'm talking about, at government level, and he's still he's just not going to listen to anyone, and he's just going to go full steam ahead. It's quite scary to think about it, actually, and what he's capable of doing. And he's like a really, like a bullet in a china shop kind of thing. He's just going hard out.
Yeah, I mean, as far as messaging around this goes, we could simplify it. We could go, why should rich people get more rights than poor people? Why should corporations get more rights than regular folk?
Yeah.
Isn't it one person, one vote? Just to turn the message around on them.
Yeah.
Like what you said before, fish climb that tree. There are ways we can simplify the messaging if need be. But a lot of lefties tend to be political tragics. We love diving in head first into like big books written by Karl Marx or Peter Kropotkin, or these big academic essays, and it's just like the average person ain't got time for that shit. They just got home from work, they want to eat dinner, they just want to watch the news and figure out what the fuck is going on.
Like when you think about it, you look back maybe like 200 years ago, and then the aristocrats had all the land and all the the mana and everything, and all the peasants did all the mahi. It's like, gosh, are we going back to that? Like they were born into this if you were born into the peasants, that you weren't going to get out of that life, or you were stuck there. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, are we going to is that what's happening here? I don't know. It's it's challenging to actually, just the submissions are just amazing. But gosh, you're thinking, oh my God, what the hell's going on in our country? And we're looking at the world, and they're all like, it's a bit crazy at the moment. It's like, oh my goodness, seeing something? Are they in cahoots with Trump and everything? Is there something going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. Okay, so chat, your homework for tonight is to sit down and watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Okay, you're going to watch that movie, and you're going to learn the difference between autocracy and the difference between serfdom. I love that film. All right.